Hi, I'm Ruth Pierce. I'm the Relationship Maximizer, and we're going through the second half of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is where we change from the private victory to the public victory. First half of the book is about private victory. It's becoming who we want to be. The who, not what we do or what we say, but who. Those other two things are important. Yes, they're important, but it's more important who you are than what you say or what you do. Now, as a quick review, we're going to go through the first 3 habits very quickly. And that is habit number 1 is be proactive. Recognize that you are the owner. You are responsible for who you become, who you're becoming, and what you want your life to be. Nobody else is responsible for you. You're not responsible for anybody else. Now, yeah, if you've got dependent little kids at home, yes, you still are responsible for them until they are growing up and more on their own. And it's a gradual process when they take over their own ownership and their own responsibility. And that's part of your responsibility as a parent is to pass that responsibility on to them in a logical process manner. That's just a sidebar. So anyway, be proactive is habit 1. Habit 2 is begin with the end in mind. And Stephen Covey starts the chapter on this habit with imagining yourself going to your own funeral and what other people are saying about you. Are you liking what they're saying? Is it true? We don't want people just to say good things about you if they're not true. But has your life been what you wanted it to be? And if it's not, if you're not on that right path yet, then be proactive. Habit 1 and figure out what you want your life to be. And then habit 3 is begin with the end in mind. And so now you know what program you want to be. You know you're the programmer and you know what program you want to run in your life. And begin with the end in mind is that run the program the way you want to. Now, I will be the first one to say, because I have to point fingers back at me when I say this, is it's a continuum. And we don't always act, we don't always show forth who we want to be. We're going to go backwards at times, and that's okay. Don't do the guilt trip. Don't do the condemnation. Just recognize that you went backwards. Awareness is key, and then get right back on the path that you want to be. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, we're not even going to go into a new habit today, but public victory has to do with habits 4, 5, and 6. And we'll start habit 4, not next week, because we'll do 2 sections on each thing. We're going to do 2 sections on the introduction to public victory. I think it's that important that we do that. You have to remember, oh, let me back up here. Let me erase that statement. Let me say this one in here first. In fact, get a piece of paper if you have one close, because we're going to talk about 3 different words. Some of them we're pretty familiar with, but the third one we may not be as much. And this is important because Stephen Covey was where I first heard these 3 things talked about. But we're going to clarify them a little bit before we get going any further. The first one is dependence. And we pretty much know what that means. When we're being too dependent on a relationship, and remember, relationship can be with another person, with a group, with organization, can be anything. When we're too dependent, one person in our group today said, you're a slave to that person. And that's very true, at least in some parts of that relationship. When I'm too dependent, then I'm letting that person control my program that I want for my life. I'm not running it. I'm not being proactive. They're the one that's in charge. Is that what we want? Sometimes we go backwards in that night, especially our key relationships. Or you can have that type of dependence on the place where you work because you're dependent on that organization or your income, your benefits, and you don't have the security within yourself that you know you could go out and get another job. Something to work on. The next one is independence. And we know that. And basically, we think it's a good word. And it is. It's a very good word. It's where I'm comfortable with who I am. And I know that I can take care of myself in all aspects. Now, there's sometimes we depend on others more than others. I've just got through some hip replacement, and some different things going on in my knees. And I've had to become or I won't say too dependent on my husband to help me because of that. And now I'm ready to take my independence back and get going again on my own. But sometimes we have to go into those. And as long as it's temporary, we're okay. But as soon as you can, take your independence back. And emotionally, I would say stay out of dependence and stay in independence. Mentally, you've got 4 broad areas. In fact, Stephen Covey's going to talk about these later in Sharpening the Saw, the 7th habit. But he divides life into 4 areas: your emotional, your mental, your spiritual, and your physical. And all of those are important. And all of this is important to be independent in. Like I say, it's all a continuum, and not all of us are in the same place. And some of us can't get, especially in the physical, to the place that some other people are. And we have to recognize that too. And remember, you're the programmer. So you get to write how you want to be independent. One thing that came up in our book club was, if I'm independent, does that mean that I cook all my own food, I grow all my food, all that? No, it doesn't. It may mean that, and it's okay if it does. But remember, you're in charge, and you're putting the first things first that are important to you. Don't let anybody else tell you what should be your first things. So that's independence. And then the third word is the one that you may not have heard as much, and it is interdependence. In fact, I think I first heard this word decades ago when I read Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, 30 years ago. But what interdependence is where you have 2 individuals that are both independent. They're taking responsibility for their lives, but they recognize that life is more fun if you do it together, because our relationships are so important to us. And you can go further if you go together. And that's a lot of what these next 3 habits are all going to be about. But the key here is that you cannot have an interdependent relationship if you have not become independent first. Private victory always comes before public victory. And I liked what this was in Stephen Covey's book, but I'm a former math teacher, so it made sense to me. algebra must come before calculus. You're never going to understand calculus if you don't understand algebra. It is impossible to jump into effective relationships without the maturity, the strength of character to maintain them. You cannot be successful with other people if you have not paid the price of success with yourself. The importance of loving and valuing you before you can truly love and value others. Self-mastery and self-discipline based on principles, and your principles are the foundation of good relationships with others. And I love this next statement from Stephen Covey. Willpower and trying harder by itself will not cut it. You have to do that internal work to build your life on the principles that you think are important, that you want to be in your program. And then you've got to put first things first. And our goal in this whole section is interdependency. Interdependence is a choice only independent people can make. Unless you are willing to achieve real interdependence, it is foolish to try to develop human relationships, relationship skills. And that's a heavy-duty statement, isn't it? It makes me think of the habit back, I think it was 3, it might have been 2, where he talked about the alternate centers, depending on different people or letting them influence your decisions. And any of these can steal your independence. And there's no way you're going to reach independence if you do not truly love and value yourself. And do not let anyone tell you this is selfish. Though I do want to go on a rabbit trail with you just a minute. And all of us have been guilty of this at times. And we've seen it in other people, and it may be easier to recognize in other people than in our own selves. But when we're talking independence, you want it to be a calm independence. You don't want to run over people with your independence. Just like you don't want to be run over by other people's independence. You need to be able to hear their point of view and that type of thing. We'll be getting into more of that later in the next habits. But we've all been guilty, or we've all been on the receiving end of somebody driving a stake in the ground, demanding their independence and saying, this is what I'm doing. It's my way or the highway. And that's not the independence we're talking about. In fact, I'm even going to say that's being passive aggressive. And that's the reason that loving and valuing yourself or being independent gets a bad rap. It comes across as being selfish. So yes, figure out who you are, who you want to become. Build your program, run your program. But then when you're stating your independence to somebody else, make sure it doesn't come across as demanding. Because in fact, I really think that's not true independence. That's showing insecurity, and you finally just had enough. And it's boiling over. And I get to point all 10 fingers back at me on that one, because The former Ruth did that a lot. I thought I was being unselfish. And I was getting run over. And I would handle it for so long, and then it would just boil over. And it came out bad. I don't want that for myself anymore, and I don't want it for you. So yes, develop your independence, but keep in mind it is a calm independence that doesn't run over other people. And don't let them run over you either. The most important ingredient you can put in any relationship is not what we say or what we do, but who we are. Or you can use what we are, whichever one makes more sense to you. The more you develop who you are, and it's who you want to be, and it's a healthy, wonderful human being, then that's going to naturally flow out in what you say and what you do. The place to begin building any relationship is inside ourselves, inside our circle of influence, our own character. Okay. We must address the root issues and not just put band-aids on the acute pain. And I'm going to add to that, it's not in my notes at this point, but a lot of us have put up with chronic pain for years. I'm not talking physical at the moment. I'm talking emotional or mental. And you don't want to do that either. That's where you write your program. You get proactive and you write your program. And we want to take care of that golden goose that produces the golden eggs. We don't want to destroy the golden goose, trying to get the golden eggs out before they're mature, because there won't be any there. And then you've also killed your golden goose. That goes back to the beginning, one of the first parts in Private Victory. So if that doesn't make sense to you, I encourage you to go back. And if you're not a reader, get the audiobook. Listen to it while you exercise. Now, we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about probably the most important subject in this introduction to the Public Victory, and that is the emotional bank account. You may have heard that term. As far as I know, Stephen Covey was the first one that coined it, but I could be wrong on that. But a lot of people have used it since then. But we're very familiar with money bank accounts. And in money bank accounts, you have deposits and you have withdrawals. And if you put in more deposits than you do withdrawals, then you've got a reserve of money that you can fall back on. When you make too many withdrawals, then you're overdrawn. And you can get into some pretty major fees when you overdraw a bank account. Now take that same concept into the non-tangible part of your life, whether it be the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, even the physical. Because if we don't take care of our bodies, those are withdrawals, aren't they? And eventually we will become overdrawn. An emotional bank account is a metaphor that describes the amount of trust. So think of emotional bank account and trust together. that's been built up in a relationship. It is the feeling of safeness you will have with another human being. If I make deposits into an emotional bank account with you through courtesy, kindness, honesty, keeping my commitments to you, I build up a reserve. Your trust towards me becomes higher, and I can call upon that trust many times if I need to. You have several different emotional bank accounts with the different relationships in your life. People, groups, organizations, and they have accounts with you that they're making deposits or withdrawals. And if I have a reserve in my emotional bank account with you, then I can even make mistakes. And that trust level, that emotional reserve will compensate for it. I don't get overdrawn. But the exact opposite is true. If I'm overdrawn, or if I've got a very low bank account, I know during the times in my life when the bank account got pretty low at times, you watch everything that comes out of it because you don't want to get overdrawn. And if your emotional bank account is like that, then I'm walking on eggshells. I'm looking at minefields. I have to be very careful of everything I say or don't say. This is interesting too, that your more constant relationships require our most constant deposits. If you've had friendships from way back, even if you haven't seen them for several years, it's almost like when you jump back in, the trust is there and you just take off. And they don't seem to need those constant deposits as much as the day-to-day people that are in our lives. So think about those key people in your life. And are you making enough deposits so that you've got a reserve and you won't have to ever walk on minefields? I won't say ever, but at least for a long time. Okay. I'm going to give you just this in closing as a teaser for next session, because we're going to really go into depth on it then. And that is the section on 6 major deposits. And he does list out these and he explains them very well. Because keep in mind that if I do something, if I contribute something to your emotional bank account, and you don't see it as a deposit, just because I think it is, it's not a deposit. Whoever's receiving that deposit gets to decide that. So I'm just going to, in ending, I'm going to list these out and then we'll talk about them more next time. Number 1, understanding the individual. Number 2, attending to the little things. Number 3, keeping commitments. Number 4, clarifying expectations. And 5, showing personal integrity. And we'll go into that more deep time next time. And with that, I'll say goodbye until next time.